Got it. Can we all see this?
Yep, you're good. That's perfect. Now if you just hit that thing, perfect. All right, so welcome everybody. Really appreciate people jumping on here. I think we're going to continue to grow this thing, and it's really exciting, within our department, within all the sports performance. But whenever we can get together, long-term mission, as we talked about in the past, is whenever we can get back together in person, we're going to do this, and we'll continue growing as a community. Want it to be really informal, just kind of hanging out. We're trying to solve performance problems that may exist, and just bring different people on to give us some different perspective a little bit. Adam, hit that next slide, please. All right, today, so what we got is Adam Gahm from our department here in performance science. We're going to be talking a little bit about travel and athletic performance. We're going to kind of have this as a couple session kind of event, and talking about this area multiple times through the next coming sessions, but he's going to dig into that a little bit. And then we're fortunate to have Dr. John Wagle from the Kansas City Royals organization. He's somebody that we've looked up to for quite a while. He's done some really fantastic things in the game of baseball and in college athletics, so we're lucky to have him. Just as a reminder, we are recording this, so please just be sensitive to what you say. If anything is ever said that's we don't want to be recorded, we can always delete it. Please just reach out to me, but we are recording that. So without anything else here, Adam, take it away, brother.
All right, thank you. Like Nelly said, my name's Adam Gahm. I'm one of the new hires here in the performance science department, and I'm going to be talking to you guys today a little bit about travel and how it's going to impact athletic performance. It's a pretty big topic. There's a lot of routes you could go with it. So this first one is going to be pretty general advice on how to deal with travel to kind of mitigate the impact it's going to have on your performance. So goals for today. First thing we're going to do, just describe how and why travel is going to have an impact on your performance. We're going to identify some key factors, key considerations that are going to influence how much travel is going to impact your performance. And then last, most important, we're going to discuss how we can mitigate some of those impacts and perform at the highest level we can when we have to travel. So, all right, first, how and why. So there's basically two ways that travel is going to impact your performance. There's acutely and chronically. Okay, so acutely, this is like short-term effects. Okay, so an individual bout of travel and how that individual bout is going to impact your upcoming competition, okay, for that weekend or for that day or the next day. Okay, most commonly, we're going to call that jet lag. Okay, and then obviously jet lag happens when you fly. There's some short-term effects as well from bus travel and things like that. Okay, so biggest way that or biggest reason we're going to see impacts on performance acutely is disruptions to your circadian rhythm. Okay, so circadian rhythm desynchronization. Okay, that's when your body clock, okay, is not equal to the world clock, okay, or what you're used to. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about circadian rhythm. Okay, I called it the body clock. That's kind of layman's terms for it. Okay, and basically what that is there's a lot of bodily functions that follow roughly a 24-hour cycle. Okay, so here's an example of a circadian rhythm. This is just an example. Everybody's circadian rhythm is going to look a little bit different, and it is trainable. So your circadian rhythm is going to adapt to your daily schedule. Okay, the biggest influence on your circadian rhythm is going to be the sun. Okay, so the light from outside, natural light, is going to have a huge impact, huge influence on your circadian rhythm. So a lot of bodily functions, okay, that follow roughly a 24-hour cycle. You see coordination up there, reaction times, alertness, hormone secretions, stuff like that, all following your body clock. Okay, so the biggest ones that are going to impact performance, appetite and digestion follow a body clock. Obviously, your sleep and wake cycle is going to follow a 24-hour cycle, and then mood and alertness is also going to follow about a 24-hour cycle as well. So if your eating patterns are altered because of your travel or you're in a new time zone, that can lead to some digestion pattern kind of mishaps. All right, so some indigestion, some GI issues that are obviously going to have an impact on performance. Your sleep-wake cycle. Okay, so being tired at inappropriate times throughout the day. So a time of day when normally you would be alert, you'd be ready to go. You're going to be tired at that time. So think around competition time. And then a lack of sleep due to travel is we know that's going to reduce some physical outputs. All right, muscular strength, power output, things like that can decline from a lack of sleep. And then your cognitive functioning as well. So complex tasks, those become more difficult on less sleep. Okay, so competing in athletics, that's a pretty complex task. So that's going to decline with less sleep. Okay, and then mood and alertness. Okay, disrupting your circadian rhythm, it's going to have an impact on your typical mood throughout the day. You might see a lack of motivation, lack of alertness throughout the day as well. So overall, disruptions to your circadian rhythm, it can have a wide variety of detrimental consequences on your performance. So heading back, one other way that you're going to see some acute impacts is periods of extended sitting. We'll get more into that as well, but obviously when you travel, you're usually sitting for a long period of time. Chronic effects. These are long-term effects throughout the season. We kind of call this travel fatigue. This is an accumulation of stress over the entire season that kind of builds up and kind of wears on your athletes over time. This can be from chronic sleep deficit, lack of comfort, relaxation throughout the year, disruptions to their normal schedule, anything like that is going to build up and cause stress throughout the year. So some contributing factors. So what's going to influence these short-term effects? Speaking about air travel, the number of time zones you cross. Obviously, if you're going to cross more time zones, it's going to take more time for your body to adjust and resync its circadian rhythm. All right, so that can be anywhere from half a day up to 2 days for each time zone that you cross, that it's going to take your body to readjust and realign its body clock. All right, so if you cross 2 time zones, it could take anywhere from 1 to 4 days for your body to readjust. The direction of travel also has a big impact. Okay, so we know it's a lot easier for us to travel west than it is for us to travel east. Okay, this is due to your body clock. It's easier for you to extend your body clock a little bit rather than to shorten it up. All right, so when we travel west, we got to extend our body clock an hour or two. When we travel back east, okay, we have to shorten it an hour or two, which is a lot more difficult for our body to do. So that's something to think about as well. The time of flight and departure. Okay, so you always need to consider what time it is in at your destination as much as you do at your home. All right, so where you're taking off from. And obviously daytime and nighttime, that's going to have a big impact on how your body reacts to the travel. So best case scenario is you would want to take off in daylight and land in daylight as well. That's going to kind of cause less confusion for your body, okay, rather than maybe taking off in daylight and landing at nighttime, or vice versa, taking off at nighttime, landing in daylight. And then just general considerations, overall travel time. So just what's the length of the travel bout, okay? How much time are you going to spend sitting, and how many breaks are you going to be able to take? Okay, so that could be for bus travel or plane travel. The events surrounding travel. Okay, so what does your travel day actually look like? Do you have other stuff going on that day? So are you getting a practice in before you take off or after you get there? Are you getting a training session in, a strength training session in the weight room? Stuff like that is all things you need to consider as well. And then proximity to competition. Okay, so how close is your travel to when you're actually going to compete? And are you allowing yourself enough time to adjust and resync your body clock, all right, to your new place? Okay. Next, long-term considerations. Okay, so these are all just very general, nothing specific to any one type of travel. Need to think about the overall length of your season. All right, so some sports have a really kind of a short, really intense season. Some sports have a longer, more extensive season. So I think short and intense, I think like field hockey, soccer, maybe football even. Then long and intense, I think, like baseball or softball, where you're playing a lot of midweek games. Your season is just longer in general. So those are things to consider. The density of travel. So how many trips are you taking in a short amount of time? Okay, it's going to be harder to go back to back to back on away trips rather than it is to just have an away trip, then be home, then maybe have another away trip, then be home. All that kind of adds up quickly. And then consider, are you a front-loaded or back-loaded travel schedule? All right, so playing in the spring, you're probably going to have a front-loaded travel schedule just because you have to travel someplace warmer just to be able to compete. So that's something to consider as well. You might approach the beginning of your season a little bit different than you approach the end of your season. You can keep track of total distance traveled and total time spent traveling and kind of compare that to years in the past or compare it month to month and know exactly how much you are traveling and kind of keep track of that and compare and see how your team's reacting to that. Think about the typical sleep patterns of your program. Is your team early risers or are they night owls? Okay, so if your team's early risers, getting them up a little bit earlier to travel might not be as big of a deal. Or if your team's night owls, maybe not getting to your destination until a little later in the night isn't going to affect them as if you flip-flop that. And you're an early rising team and you're traveling late into the night, that's going to affect you a little bit more than it would if you're a team that typically stays up later at night. And then probably most importantly is going to be your pre-travel and post-travel weekly schedule. And we'll get a little bit more into that on the next few slides. All right, so now, most important is probably going to be mitigation. So what can we do to account for some of those key considerations that's going to impact our performance? All right, so in the short term, obviously, number one, you got to account for time zone changes. All right, so you want to make sure you're allowing enough time to resync your circadian rhythm to wherever it is you're going to be competing at. Okay, so if we're traveling west, that's usually half a day for each time zone you cross. Okay, maybe up to an entire day for each time zone. You can get on your destination time during the lead up week. Okay, so the week leading up to your travel, you can kind of make some small shifts in your schedule to get closer to the time of your destination for competition. All right, so you can shift a half hour to an hour in your sleep schedule, your training schedule, your eating schedules, and that's going to make it a lot easier on the back end for your body to adjust once you get to your new destination. Okay, you can bank sleep during the week leading up to travel. Okay, so allowing your athletes an extra half hour or an extra hour a day of sleep is going to help account for any potential losses in sleep that you might account for or you might encounter during your travel. Okay, so sleep is very cumulative over like a week. So if you lose an hour or two while you travel, but you made up for it a lot during the week before, okay, that's going to have less of an impact on you to lose that hour or two of sleep. You can take as much stress out of travel as possible. Okay, so if you know it's going to be a tough travel day, you have a big trip coming up, a long bus ride or a flight, you can think about adjusting what you're doing that day, whether it's adjusting practice or adjusting your training sessions, okay, to make sure that you're not putting too much stress on your athletes in one day. Okay, so if you're getting a lot of stress from travel, maybe think about reducing some of the stress during practice or during the training sessions. With the sitting, okay, so if you're going to be sitting for a long time, okay, it's important to try to increase circulation and limit the swelling. So when you sit for a long time, you might notice like your feet, your ankles, your lower body, it kind of starts to swell up. That's due to decreased circulation and body fluids just kind of building up in your lower limb from not moving around a lot. Okay, so you can combat that by wearing compression socks during travel. That's something that's super easy. You can have all your athletes throw on compression socks, and it does a really good job of increasing circulation. And then you can obviously encourage movement and breaks during travel as well. So get your athletes to get up, walk around, take a bathroom break on the bus, on the plane, maybe stop the bus halfway through and let your athletes kind of shake it out a little bit is going to help with that as well. You can make small diet adjustments when you get to the new time zone. All right, so you can eat a high carb meal at night to promote tiredness if you want them to be tired and get to bed at a normal time. And then you can eat a high protein meal in the morning that's going to help promote alertness as well and help kind of wake them up a little bit in the morning if they're going to feel drowsy. Okay, you can use light to your advantage, bright lights, especially blue lights, can go a long way to waking athletes up. So if you know you had a hard travel day, they didn't get much sleep in the morning, you can get them around some bright blue lights, and that'll help kind of push their circadian rhythm towards the destination time and wake them up. Stay hydrated. That's obviously a big one, especially when you fly. You dehydrate faster when you fly. And then also hydrating is going to help calm some of the GI issues that might arise from flying and from adjusting your circadian rhythm. Caffeine supplementation, this is something you can use. I would use it sparingly. It's kind of low on the list in terms of what's going to be most effective. Use it sparingly. It's kind of a Band-Aid, kind of a last ditch kind of thing. Make sure you're educating your athletes on caffeine supplementation, and use our sports nutrition department here too, and see what they recommend for the athletes. Last one, taking a midday nap. This can be pretty effective, but you just want to make sure you limit it to about 20 to 30 minutes. Any longer than that, and you're just going to wake up a little bit too drowsy, and it's going to have basically the opposite effect of what you would want, which is to make them more alert. Long-term, okay, so how do we mitigate the long-term effects of travel fatigue? Overall, you want to make sure you're accounting for the stress that travel is going to have on your athletes, just like you would, training volume or practice volume or conditioning volume, anything like that. You might want to consider periodizing your training around high volume travel times. So if you know you're taking a big trip this week, at the end of the week, you might think about limiting or adjusting what your practice schedule is like, how much you're training, things like that, to just limit the total amount of stress you're putting on the athletes at any one time. And then vice versa, if you're not doing a lot of traveling, maybe that's a time that you kind of ramp training back up and ask a little bit more of the athlete. Big one is to allow your circadian rhythm to resync after your trip as well. Us being in Pennsylvania, a lot of times we're going to be traveling back east to come back home. And like I said earlier, it's harder to travel back east and to readjust, for your body to readjust. Okay, so it can take up to 2 days per time zone to readjust. So if you're crossing 2 time zones to come back home, that can take up to 4 days for your athletes to kind of get back in rhythm and get resynced up. Okay, 4 days, that's almost the entire week leading into the next competition. So that can definitely have a huge impact on your preparation for the next competition, and maybe even getting into the actual competition. So definitely think about what you're doing the week after travel as well. Stress accumulates over the season, so you might want to consider and account for travel more at the end of the season than at the beginning, because it kind of just builds up over time. Consistently managing the short-term effects is obviously going to have a big impact on how much travel is impacting you in the long term as well. And then last thing, just try to make travel as comfortable as possible for them. All right, so you can encourage your athletes to bring their own pillow, blanket, etc., anything that's going to make them more comfortable, both while they're traveling on the bus or the plane, and when they get to the hotel, to kind of make it feel a little bit more homey, and make sure that they're comfortable and getting enough sleep, enough rest, and so on. Last thing, just kind of the final takeaways overall, adjust where you can. I know a lot of times some of these things are out of our hands, in terms of travel schedule or competition schedule, whatever it is, but just adjust what you can. Do some things to adapt quickly once you get to your destination, and then try to monitor your travel and how it's impacting your athletes as well. And that's it. Do those 3 things, and then kind of follow these general guidelines, and I think it'll help you guys out a little bit in managing your travel schedule this spring.
Awesome, Adam. I really appreciate you sharing that, man. Good job with that. We'll save some questions toward the end. Do want to move to Dr. Wagle. He's coming to us from the Kansas City Royals. Definitely been looking up to John for a long time, and really appreciate him being on there. So, Adam, if you kick your screen off, Dr. Wagle, I've given you co-host ability, so you should be able to share your screen there.
I think I'm all right. Nope. I have a screen error sharing code.
Interesting.
Error code.
Let's try this. And I wasn't typing fast enough to you here. Let's try this again. But if you want to, you can ask what you just said. We can go through the presentation that you had planned. We can do some Q&A, whatever you feel like is best.
Well, especially because I apparently am not having too much luck with the screen sharing. Yeah, I get an error code every time I go to share. So that's odd.
Try this right there. Try that right there.
Nope, still error code.
I gotcha. Well, what if we just kind of
Maybe if I
want to just kind of give a little bit of background and kind of go through a couple things, and maybe we can hit with some Q&A.
Yeah. So since we're facing technical difficulties and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, my role here with the Royals, I'm our Director of Performance Science and Player Development. So basically what that means is I support everybody else in trying to be better at their jobs and provide them decision support systems and knowledge. And really what I was going to talk about today was how we communicate knowledge. But that's really kind of my role, is to support our field staff, our hitting coaches, pitching coaches, and then I do oversee, in addition to our strength conditioning coordinator and some other people, our strength conditioning program. Prior to that, I worked at the Olympic training site level while I was doing my PhD in physiology and sport performance. Worked with bobsledders, really cool group to work with, and worked with the baseball team during that time as well, because it was embedded in a university. And then prior to that, I was in the men's basketball world in the Big East with DePaul University. So was the director there for a few years. So I've kind of been in a lot of weird different environments with different challenges, and provided S&C sports science support and in a lot of different walks of life. And so I guess with that, like, because technology is betraying me, ironically, and we do have a few minutes, if you guys had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and that can be as broad as you'd like it.
I'll kind of kick the question off, and it's something that you and I talked about in the summer. Is across all your affiliate systems, you accumulate information, whether it be on field, in a training or developmental setting. How do you reduce that down to be able to make a decision, and then maybe how do you use it across the organization?
Yeah, so there's a level of consistency in our processes. So we do have kind of a systematic approach to get regular data on everybody, and that we call that just context specific knowledge. It's at the player level, it's at the organization level, it's what's real for us, because the reality of it is not every research paper applies to our setting or our players. And so we really try to balance those two. Of we do lean on general scientific knowledge and the latest research, but more so we do have that context specific knowledge to help us guide player development and make individualized decisions. So if we kind of take our 10,000-foot view, it's more on the general side, where we let research and what's best practice in that regard guide us. And then as we zoom in to the individual, it does come down to our internal data. And really, like, we're in an interdisciplinary competition to know more about baseball and what makes really good major league players against the rest of the league. And so a lot of what we do is quite simply studying the sport, studying the individual, and leveraging that information to help players reach their ceiling. So it's kind of a cool gig, because it fills the curiosity and the competitiveness simultaneously.
Hey, John, I had a question as well.
Yep.
When you get a new player within the organization, how do you evaluate them from a physical standpoint? And then potentially anything extra in terms of technical, tactical, or baseball skill that may be relevant to some of our sport coaches on the call.
Yeah. So we have a physical battery that's um, on the S&C side about 8 tests, and then on the medical side we get about 150 data points on the orthopedic eval. So that's kind of thing number one. And really all of the tests that we select are generated from questions asked by sport coaches, and then kind of they survive the test of time by being internally um, validated in terms of their importance to on-field performance. So we don't have a test in our battery that isn't either answering a question that field staff has or relates to something their on-field performance. So they go through that, and then on the hitting side we have tools like blast motion, K-Vest, Rapsodo, all of that. On the pitching side we have the Rapsodo and TrackMan and some of those tools. And obviously we lean, because we're such a skill dominant sport, we lean very heavily on video and biomechanical and assessments and things like that for when they're actually performing their technical actions. And so and also in the departments that maybe I'm not involved in specifically because they're outside of my scope of practice, or on the psychology side and those areas also have their own assessments. So we have a pretty complete view of that player really kind of before they walk in, and then it becomes a little bit more refined once they get here too. And so goes the player development process after that. But we do have tests, I guess, going back to your original question, for pitchers and for position players too, that are slightly different. In general, the position players are more strength power oriented, and in general, the pitchers do have, despite like what's very unpopular. I hold an unpopular opinion. I believe, and our data would support that. So does the research, that like conditioning is really important for pitchers. So they are treated with a little bit more on the conditioning side than our position players are.
Do you guys, and you don't have to disclose anything that's sensitive, but do you guys use any markers of performance or KPIs that you have per position that you would be willing to talk about?
Yeah, so this is actually something that I was planning to cover in my talk. We kind of divide them into two buckets. KPIs are, for maybe people that aren't familiar, KPIs are key performance indicators. They are the things that directly influence sporting success. So, like if X improves, high performance will certainly be the result. So they're really instrumental in understanding what it takes to win. And the easiest example is actually from my bobsled days. Like if we get a bobsled push athlete faster, they are going to push the bobsled better. Like they're just big sprinters. So they push the sled faster, they put their driver in a better position to then win the race. Like if we get them faster, we know they're going to be a better push athlete. If I get a baseball player faster, I don't know that they're going to be able to steal more bases. Like theoretically, like we afford them some margin of error and all, but like base stealing is extremely tactical. And so that's not necessarily a KPI for us, but what it might be is what I call a potential restraint factor. And so those are the things that may indirectly influence sports success. A lot of times they're prerequisites. A lot of times they are things that if they're underdeveloped, they have the very high chance of contributing to low performance. So it's really hard to steal a base if I'm really slow. My tactical would have to be just unbelievable in order to overcome being really, really slow. So if I get faster, like I might steal more bases, I might not, but I certainly like have filled the prerequisite of like more manner as well. And that's kind of the way we bucket the potential restraint factors they help us understand what is preventing winning or what is preventing player development. And so dividing into those two camps, we feel like we have a pretty good lens by which to view the player and their development process, because there's not always this linear, clean KPI to follow, especially in baseball, that is extremely skill dominant. And I think you see that with how heterogeneous the physical profiles are. If you look at like a major league pitcher, they look a lot of different ways. Now, if you get down to the center fielders, shortstops, like they start to kind of narrow down that funnel a little bit. But to have KPIs for those positions that have a lot of that heterogeneity, in my opinion, just isn't logical at the face value either, because they're such a diverse group.
I think that's interesting. And we have a diverse group here. We have baseball, softball. We have representatives from hockey, from track, from other field sports. We probably see the same thing, within field sports, within competitive team sports, where KPIs are hard to evaluate because success on the field or court or mat maybe are not directly related.
Yep. The ones that are really tricky are like basketball. Hockey is very skill intensive, but it kind of, relative to like baseball. I actually put MMA in the pretty skill intensive bucket, even though it's not a college sport. Golf, obviously, like very skill intensive, but those middle ground, like football, basketball, soccer, hockey, are really, really tricky. Because and I think basketball is probably the easiest example that, like height is a pretty reasonable KPI. We can't necessarily improve it or anything like that. We can't like stretch people out. But like my basketball career was catastrophically cut well short of what I wanted it to be, because I'm 5'7". Like I don't have that KPI. But if I would have kept getting taller, like pretty reasonably, that would have helped me win. I think that those sports are pretty tricky, because there's some absolutes and there's some relatives that you've got to manage with those groups. So Cam, you have a really hard job with your hockey guys, and at the beginning of the call, it was even down to the haircut. So like I can't imagine such a multifactorial process.
Well, that's funny, but if I could, I'd like to jump in with a question here. And with the KPIs, for the last 2 years, been measuring some things and just kind of narrowed it down this year. I've picked 4 that I've deemed that I think is important. I'm still trying to find which ones are saying if X improves, hockey improves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question for you here is because we've got a lot of different people, and to be general is, we just went through a 12-week off-season program. This week is now starting our first week of games. And so my question is, we've seen these KPIs improve a little bit. And what I'm thinking is, how long now into season, if I do a counter movement jump once to twice every week, how much time would you give that KPI to either improve or get worse before you make judgments in your training to change what you're doing in season? That's one thing that I've been struggling with last couple of years is am I making this decision too soon to change my training, or do I need to act now?
Yep.
And I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Yeah. So I hate to be the classic like strength coach guy here and say it depends, but like all of our, ligaments and tendons have a different time course of adaptation. Muscle has a different time course of adaptation. Nervous system has a different time course of adaptation. Nervous system being the shortest, and which is also what makes it the most volatile and the most fatigue sensitive. So, but like tendons and ligaments take like 10, 12 weeks. So for like anything that we're doing on the injury risk reduction side, or like building throwing programs for UCL tears, or in basketball, for example, with ACL tears, like we've got to give that some time. Or patellar tendon tears is probably the better example, because ACLs are a different bird. But really, you do have a window that you've got to let it play out. And if you lean on just like general physiology and those time courses of change, like you'll get a reasonable window that's probably a little bit wider than you would want, of maybe like 8 to 12 weeks. Um, but but there's a lot of things to consider within your program too, um, to know when to change course, or when to stay the course. Like obviously, like what's occurring at practice, what's occurring, the classic stuff that we take into account there. But the in general, we will, with an off season where there's not as much going on, we'll lean more on that general physiology and let it play out. When there's a lot of complexity introduced, they're back in class, they're back at practice. That's when we will be a little bit more, in my opinion, we need to be a little bit more proactive in shifting gears. And so off season, we use athlete monitoring to evaluate program efficacy. When we do have the athletes there doing a lot of on-field work, things like that, athlete monitoring, those same tools get repurposed for fatigue management. And so it's not that my program's not working or isn't work or is working and driving those KPIs up. It's more that I've gotten to the top of the mountain, but at the top of the mountain, the air is thin and the peak is small. So like I've got to move quickly and be ready to manage that athlete to sustain close to that peak for a long time, especially if you've identified that that's important. Like now I'm kind of just rambling on, but if you've identified that that thing is important, like training to it and then sustaining it are equally as valuable.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
End of rant. Sorry, I went a lot of different directions there.
Can I go one more?
Mhm.
If you were to pick your top 3 KPIs from a counter movement jump, which ones do you think you would measure? And I guess that's my question. Like, what's your top 3?
So I will admit, like I have to be a little bit careful just because like we have some, not that we've got this magic elixir, but we do have some that like are maybe are kept secrets for for offensive and pitching performance that maybe the other clubs don't know about. But in general, a braking variable. My favorite here is force at zero velocity. So that's kind of the peak braking force. So the athlete one weight, and then at the top there is force at zero velocity. That's kind of a prerequisite value. Like if you're really deficient there, it's really challenging to have any favorable things happen in the propulsive phase. And so like that's generally kind of check mark number one. And then we do like having a propulsive force measure. And so if you go anything beyond that force at zero velocity, that's the propulsive phase of the jump, of course. So there's mean force, there's the concentric mean force, there's concentric impulse, force decks or Hawken. I'm not sure who you guys use, but they have like a P1, P2 concentric impulse. So that's the first half of the concentric impulse, second half of the concentric impulse. I would generally go more towards the second half, just because that first half is going to be pretty much the same as what you would see with force at zero velocity. And then lastly, I think that RSI mod is oversimplified, but sometimes that can be a good thing. And so RSI mod for us is a pretty good indicator of, are they tired, and do we need to acutely manage something there. And it appears in probably like 10 research papers now, like RSI mod and sprint speed is pretty well established. And I am like I hold the bias of an old sprints coach that's just been working with team sports forever, that like speed's universal in sport. And so if we can get a snapshot of kind of their explosive capabilities, I like that because sprinting, I tell all of our guys, like, you guys are responsible for so many skills. Like, you have hitting for power, hitting for average, throwing, fielding. Oh, and by the way, like, sprinting is a skill people spend their entire lives trying to get better at it. Like, that's what winning the 100-meter dash is dedicating 4 years to running for 9 and some change. So, like, the counter movement jump and using RSI mod gives us a really clean, like, measurement of explosive potential that's independent of running mechanics. And so I like it from that standpoint, because it kind of points me in the direction of my problem if a guy needs to get faster. And that's really what the counter movement jump is all about, is providing you a really simple, clean, reliable way to help you more quickly identify performance problems. And it's simple to the point where it gives you a very clean roadmap, which is why, like, we jump our guys 3 times a week, might be more if we continue to gain more information. It's by far the most bang for our buck assessment that we have. Not even close.
Coach, do you guys have played at all your affiliates, or is it
Yep.
down in Arizona?
Yep, everywhere. And that didn't start that way. Like, obviously, like, it's a crawl, walk, run approach. Like, we had it in AZ and Kansas City, demonstrated some value, went ahead and moved forward with all of our other affiliates, because we were getting a lot out of it. And now we're at the point where we're kind of contemplating, like, does it need to be even more frequent? Like, do we need more data? So we've got the capabilities in place. So now we're kind of at the point where we're thinking about, are we good, or are we needing to step that up a little bit more?
Does anybody have any other question?
Yeah, I had another question actually. Based on the KPIs, if you identify an individual who may be limited in that area, how do you communicate that information across the organization and then collaboratively work to improve that limited factor?
Yeah, so and this is a good question, mostly because I'm actually, like, prepped for it a little bit, because this is what I was kind of intending to talk about. So, and I'll use counter movement jumps with force plates as an example, like, for the sport coaches that are on here. Like, there's a ton of jargon that's associated with force plate counter movement jumps. Like, if you're not in strength conditioning, heck, even if you are in strength conditioning, like, you might not know what RSI mod is. Why would you? It's not what you're accountable to know and to be good at. And so, like, I actually think we put up a lot of, I'm gonna curse, but it's purely to say the name of a book. There's a book called Calling Bullshit. And so I don't mean to curse, I'm sorry. But that book talks about kind of the evils of jargon, and jargon are one, to, like, within a group, they're to, like, communicate very easily and freely within that group. But the evil side of jargon is that it alienates everybody that's not within that group. And so for us, like, a big problem, especially, like I told you, like, we do lean on our counter movement jumps to inform player development, not only on the physical side, but on the technical, tactical side. Like, we will use that information to help a hitter or a pitcher. And so we needed more accessible terms. Like, no one knows what RSI mod is, nor should you. So we said, okay, well, like, we need to get rid of that jargon. And so we have things like, we stole a little bit of a playbook from a force plate company, but we have explosive strength, we have drive, we have load, we have, like, we have all these things that, like, are just kind of, like, intuitive, we hope. And we pair that with some internal education. We do a lot of offline education, actually, where we'll pre-record videos, send them out so people can kind of view them as they please, to just kind of close that gap a little bit. And then we also try to communicate in their language, not so much as, like, hey, like, adopt our language. We also very much take into account theirs. And I think, like, the baseball and softball folks will appreciate this one. So sorry to the hockey folks, but in baseball, the scouts communicate on a 20 to 80 scale, right? Like, if you're a 50 runner, you're an average runner. If you're a 80 runner, you're Hall of Fame. Or if you're an 80 power guy, like, you could hit 75 home runs next season. So we actually just quantitatively use those scouting grades. So we use T scores, capital T, and even though you don't necessarily need to know about T scores, the cool thing about T scores is 50 is average, and 1 standard deviation above average is 60, and 2 standard deviations is 70. And yeah, so like it's the same exact language. Like we listened to them and said like, okay, like if we need to communicate that somebody's an average runner or an average hitter or whatever, like we have ways to do that. And so like conversations become really quick, and that's what is really important, is that that information then becomes much more actionable and actionable much more quickly. So I can call a pitching coach and say like, yeah, back hip mobility is a 30, and they know like, ah, crap, like one, we either need to work on that, or two, like he's not going to be able to make the moves that we need him to make. And so it kind of accelerates the conversation by meeting them in the middle with that. And so those are some barriers to communication. I would say the third thing we try to do, like we do have reports that are for S&C and for the people with the technical expertise. And then we also what we call every man or every woman reports, where they're like very distilled down. And it's not like, no offense to anybody, like it's not their fault that they are not like a subject matter expert in physiology. Like that's not what they do. But they do need to have that information. And so we try to build we call them decision support systems, where it does package that information in a manner that is agnostic of subject matter expertise, that any person, the every man or every woman, could pick up that report and know generally like, oh, is John strong? Like, yeah, he is. Look at the green arrow, or, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of the different ways that we try to approach that. And really the three barriers are the syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic. And that's kind of all encompassed there, that we have different terms, we have different meanings of terms, and then we have different ways that like context affects our interpretation. And so like we try to be really mindful of those and support our staff as best we can with that.
I think that's important to hear, for many of us on the call in the performance world, strength, athletic training, sports science, because we do work with a lot of people. But I think it's also impactful too, maybe for coaches, because we're working with athletes and that may not fully, know coaching cues or specific things. So I think the word you use there, being agnostic of subject matter knowledge, I think that's important.
Yeah, it's probably the most important thing. I'll share a quick story. But like innovation happens at the edges of disciplines. So like I love sport coaches. You guys are geniuses in technical tactical. Like I think you're like the experiential knowledge and studying that you have done it's like unbelievable. I'm not saying that to fluff your pillows or anything like that, but like Charles Darwin and oh gosh, what's the guy's name? John Gould. So Darwin takes a bunch of notes on birds on the Galapagos Islands. He's not a bird expert, but he takes all these notes, passes them over to Gould, and Gould's like, yeah, this is meaningless. Like all these birds are the same, like, whatever. And Darwin was pretty adamant, like, no, like I'm telling you, there's something here. Darwin's like a geologist, I think, by trade, but he kept at it with Gould, and Gould, after like some reflection, then looked at Darwin's notes and said, oh my gosh, like all of these birds are unique to an island. And Darwin didn't put that together, and he's the geologist. And so it took Gould's look at Darwin's travels and Darwin's look at Gould's birds to be able to come together and arrive at what was optimal, which ended up being, the theory of natural selection. Like it wasn't Darwin or Gould independently, it was them together. And I think that's very like similar to what we have to do with coaches. And like the story I was actually originally going to share wasn't on two old guys, but like basketball coach I used to work with, like we were arguing over like how to best prepare for the Big East opener, like the 10 days leading up after Christmas, like all that. And like we're going back and forth with our different lenses. And, I finally got to the point where I was like, Coach, I'm 0-0 in the Big East. Like in my career, I've never won a Big East basketball game. Like, how many of you won? He's won a lot. He'd been Big East Coach of the Year. Like I forget the number now, but he had won quite a bit. So, well, if our goal is to win a Big East basketball game next Sunday, like we probably need to go with with your expertise, with a little bit maybe of my ideas sprinkled in, but like I'm still to this day 0-0 in the Big East, and so like I think the genius of of winning and sustaining that excellence is um, quite honestly underappreciated. I know you guys are very, very appreciated internally at Penn State because it's a historically great university athletically, but I think at the national level, particularly like within strength conditioning, we don't give you guys enough credit. So that's my tip of the cap to you, as well as hopefully some valuable perspectives.
That's awesome. It's a great point.
Maybe
Is
one day I'll
anybody?
win a basketball game. Maybe one day.
Does anyone have any questions at this
I
point?
have one if I'm allowed.
100%.
Let's go. I'm a director of ops with softball, so I love your decision support systems comment. Big fan. But my question is on, so all of the tools that you have, all of the data and everything else that you collect, what's your timing on that? So for us, ideally we have a student athlete for 4 years, and you can take a look at them and they're super athletic and know the game and anticipate them being a starter. But I don't even know if you can even decide this, but I guess top 3 or, what do you know about timing? I see you nodding your head, so I'm going to let you talk. I'm going to stop.
Yeah. One of the first things that we do, which I think this is what you're getting at, is kind of a feasibility to impact ratio. That's at the player level and at the organization level. So yes, you have your players for 4 years, but Lord willing, you're going to be at Penn State or even just coaching softball for a very, very long time. And so part of obviously like what you collect data for is to help those individual players. The other part of collecting that data is to know more about softball performance than all the other Big Ten schools and beyond. Like if you better understand the sport and what it takes to win in that sport, like you're going to be able to sustain excellence. And so there's kind of 2 ways that we look at that feasibility to impact ratio. Because we actually face like pretty similar time constraints. Like when I talk to college athletic departments, it's typically, well, we have 4 years and yada, yada, yada. Well, not yada, yada, yada. I don't mean to be rude, but like we actually are faced with pretty similar ones because we have the Rule 5 draft. So we have 3, 4, 5 years to make a decision on a guy. And so we do have a time constraint. And so that's number one. Like we need to have good feasibility to impact ratio. We also, we do need to be able to have that data be present and continue to grow. So that's a 2-part thing. So the data being present is like, can we collect it and can we collect it reliably and is it valid? But the continuing to grow part is kind of getting to that long-term approach. Like it's good to have a snapshot. It's even better to be able to put that together into a complete picture of that athlete's development process, not just like what they were like on 11, 18, 2020. And so it does have to have some growth potential to where the return on investment gets greater the more we collect it. And the third thing isn't necessarily about the data itself, but it's really important too that like we're collecting data to solve problems where there's either disagreement or multiple solutions exist. So it does me no good to collect data on something that's like extremely well established, that like nobody would disagree on. And I don't really have a good example of that in baseball or softball off the top of my head, but like really we want to be better informed as a group, not just as like in my role, but as a collective interdisciplinary team. Like we want to be better informed when we don't all think the same, and we do have differences of opinion or expertise or whatever the case may be. Or we might agree, but we might say like, man, there's 3 ways that this guy could get better, or there's 3 ways that we could win next year. Like that's where the data needs to come in and help us kind of settle that disagreement. So if it's not informing something that you aren't puzzled by, don't collect it. Like doesn't really matter then. So that's my 3 things.
My name is Jeff. I'm a softball coach here at Penn State, obviously.
Hey, Jeff.
But my question for you is, with things being a little bit more difficult, with availability to numbers, data, scouts having, eyes on, boots on the ground type of thing, the draft's coming up first, second week in July. Is there anything that's altered in how you guys look at the data or pieces that you're trying to get? Recruiting is very similar to what you guys are doing for the draft.
Yep.
Using the counter jumps and the measurements like that to judge explosiveness when you're looking at movement assessments and things like that, trying to judge explosiveness and tight versus loose and all that good stuff. Is there anything that's jumped out that has helped you kind of make decisions, obviously without giving away the playbook, but what you're looking at?
Our scouts we're really fortunate. Like, we have amazing scouts, and our front office is former scouts. So like it's a thing that we do really well. We're really fortunate to have that. I'd say like from our end, what we've really tried to inform or just provide some insight on are the things that we can. It's kind of trait versus state. So can we change it, or is it is what it is? Kind of how plastic or static the things are. And so I know I've been using running speed as an example, but with everything, but just to use that one, like we can change it, but not by much. So, we can turn a 50 runner into a 55 runner, but we can't turn a 50 runner into an 80 runner. That's just not going to happen. I think and then we help them identify the variables that like they're deficient in this, but like we've demonstrated through our player development process that like we can really move the needle on this thing. And that's where like some of the force plate variables that we've related to offensive and pitching performance, like, we can move the needle on that. So like we're comfortable more just trusting the development process with those types of things. So really the decision support system that we try to build is just to help identify those things that are a little bit stickier and a little bit easier to move the needle on. And so if you kind of bucketed those things out, I think recruiting would get a little bit easier on you too.
Thank you.
All right, so just kind of out of respect for everybody's time and Dr. Wagle's time, just if anybody has any last things, please feel free to share. But Dr. Wagle, I really appreciate the time you spent with us today. I apologize the technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's on my end too. But I guess I'll close. Thank you guys so much. This was like such a cool experience and such a cool thing that Josh has going on. And the sneaky thing is I'm actually a Nittany Lion myself. I'm doing a graduate certificate at Penn State, so I secretly am one of you guys, I guess. But it was really cool to be involved. And if you guys need anything from me ever, I can if I can get the chat to work. Josh, go ahead and feel free to share my information with anybody that may be interested in it, because I'm an open book.
Okay, I sure will. I'll share that, and definitely appreciate everybody being here. It's certainly not our department that's putting this on. It's everybody in the sports performance crew. So appreciate this, and we're going to continue to grow this. Hope everybody has a good day. And John, really appreciate it, man.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.